It looks like everyone's named on the chat function. If you want to let us know what organisation you're from too, please do so. You can actually rename in the function. We're going to let Tarquin do her presentation, but please drop in questions as they come up. If something burning comes up in terms of the presentation, we'll try and answer it, but if not, we'll do that at the end, if that's okay. We've got plenty of time for questions. And I will take a screenshot at the end, so I would love for everyone to have their cameras on and show us your beautiful smiling faces. I'm sure State NRM will love that in their quarterly report. Okay, so our presentation today is very timely with what's going on in the nature reform space, and I understand this topic's really important to everybody, as well as me, and we are passionate about protecting wild places, and that's why we do what we do. So I'm very pleased to have Tarquin Moon joining us today to step us through nature laws, the current changes that are happening at the moment, the opportunities that exist, and suggestions on what we as Landcarers can do in our communities to advocate for laws that adequately protect the environment in our home state and beyond. So I'm going to pass you over to Tarquin now, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. I'm calling from Yuggera, Juggera, Ugrapul country, so it's just west of Brisbane in a place called Ipswich. Not that far from Brisbane, but definitely has its own identity out here, and known as a place that's a little bit cooler when it's cold and a little bit hotter when it's hot. So we get those extremes on either ends. So I'm seeing how well I cope here, but we've got some lovely bird life out here, and I do appreciate that. I've worked for Birdlife for about 1.5 years, and it's really exciting in the current way where I can meet people all over the country from my home office and be part of this national work. So for that reason, I'm really so happy to speak to the good folk of WA today. Hello, and also to say that I did some work in Mandurah for the Mandurah City Council, so I have worked in different parts of the country, which is a fantastic experience. So I have been working on nature law since I've been at Birdlife, and I've been in the conservation space for a couple of decades, working for a whole stack of organisations, including WWF, the Wilderness Society, and also doing some work in regional places like Townsville. So a lot of experience, and the EPBC Act is part of what we're talking about today. It's a piece of legislation that most Australians are not aware exists, but it is a piece of legislation that does impact our lives, as in if we didn't have it, things would be worse off. Having said that, we're seeing continual declines to nature, which is why there's a real need for this 20-year-old legislation to be updated. Because it is 20 years old, but also, as we know, the challenges for our environment are just more complex and more urgent. And the urgency is also partly an indicator of how the legislation just hasn't been strong enough to do its job. So I will just cross over to the presentation. Okay, so here we go. So these are the topics that we'll go through today. And on the next 2 slides, these are slides where I'm working really hard to help people realise, I think this audience, you guys understand that these pieces of legislation are important and we need them to support the work that you are doing. But to a lot of people out there, a lot of people on the ground don't realise that if we didn't have these laws, what could we be missing out on? I mean, we need healthy soils and we need them for our environment, but we also need them for growing food. We also recognise healthy air, and a lot of people love views and waterfalls. And if we don't have the systems around them making waterfalls, we just have landscapes that are dried up and unhealthy, which has an impact on humans in terms of those anthropocentric values, but it obviously has those impacts in terms of biodiversity. There are a lot of people out there who love their fishing. Well, it's a whole system of a healthy environment and interconnected landscapes that makes fishing a thing. There are a lot of bird watchers and people who like going camping. So these are, again, some of those anthropocentric values, but they are really important in conveying just how important strong nature laws really are. And in the case of drinking water, it can get down to your basic needs. Like if we're not protecting catchments where our water supply comes from, well, that starts to impact on our basic needs as well. And then you've got the international reputation. You know, we have these amazing species found nowhere else in the world, and people travel here to see them and they think we're an amazing country, and these are the things that we can lose. And this is like this idea that if we don't have strong nature laws in 50 years time, well, some of this could be a reality. This could be the world that we were to live in. It's a bit of a doom gloom picture, but it's one of those things that if once we lose it, we actually value it better. So can we, while we have it now, value it? But also the people on this call are aware that there are continual declines. So there's actually a little bit more work to protect what we have, but actually go beyond that and really be restoring nature. And this diagram is really great because it's just showing you all of those eco services. You've got those regulating services, things like the water cycle, erosion control that the environment will give you, air quality and so on, and pollination. And then you've got those supporting services like soil formation, nutrient cycling. But then you've got those cultural values. So, you know, we love nature. It gives us a lot of meaning. For some people, spiritual meaning. It's recreation. It's like mental well-being. And then there's the basic needs that provides us with food and fresh water and medicines and so on. So with nature laws, what we need to see, what we're needing to see more of is that we're actually protecting these special places. So it's, as I said before, it's, you know, a lot of people in our communities actually really value the kind of country that we live in, but it's, if we don't protect those special places, again, those waterfalls, what are the whole environment, like ecological systems around that makes that place special. We're needing to better respond to the needs of our wildlife and to protect their habitats, help restore their populations. So that's also the threatened species, but it's also helping businesses to actually shift how they're doing things so that they're encouraged when they are pursuing activities that are great for the economy, but also helping nature to thrive at the same time. And also to allowing for that community and First Nations having valued input into the decisions. And in terms of developments, it's developments that are just causing unacceptable impacts, are just something that should be something of the past. You know, that we're actually implementing that idea of sustainability where we decisions that are good for all the different considerations, they're the ones that come through. And that's that part of the legislation where you see environmental assessments of projects, which is one of the big roles that the EPBC Act plays. So the Albanese government has made a lot of commitments and a lot of announcements. There've been some really strong ones. It's now down to the delivery of them. Things like actually I'll go through them in a moment, but at the end of the day as well, the backbone to all of those commitments is the strong nature laws. It's like this foundation that we need to be able to support all those other policy announcements. So you might have heard the word Places You Love Alliance, PYL, and there's that website there. So that is 70+ conservation organisations who are working together on the reforms, and that we've been working 10+ years. So we're not new to this. And some of the advantage of that PYL is that we've really logged at that national, state, local level, what are the repeated issues that we're coming up against the EPBC Act consistently? So that is where you start to get the answer of, well, what is wrong with it and what is needed to actually fix these laws to see outcomes for nature on the ground. Here's all the different logos of the organisations, a whole stack of them. So in terms of getting that message across that there is some great things going on, there is some real decline in nature, it's coming from reputable reports that shows us that nature is in decline. And I think the people on this call, you will be aware of some of those reports, but you also might be aware things you're seeing in your own communities. You're seeing the decline. Remembering that a lot of Australians, they're too busy in their busy lives. They're not entirely realising that we are experiencing this decline in nature. So yeah, nature laws are not doing their job. The nature laws are quite process heavy. So there's a lot of busyness around it, but it hasn't necessarily driven those on-ground outcomes where you actually see threatened species, their decline turning around and starting to see them thrive. So internationally, there are some really positive things happening as well, which is a great context of all of this work. It's showing that there's an acknowledgement of the current biodiversity crisis and that it is at that global scale. We're all dealing with it in all our jurisdictions. And then there's a real need for the urgent action. And there are positive global talks occurring and commitments being made to try to turn that around. And as part of that, business is in that picture as well. So the Global Biodiversity Framework in December 2022 saw the adoption of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework commitments. So you might have heard 30 by 30. So that's to protect 30% of lands, seas and inland waters by 2030 as protected areas. The Nature Positive movement, that 30 by 30 is part of that as well, but it's about a paradigm shift. So it's about having that shift in how nations, businesses, investors and consumers are interacting with nature. So we're not just reducing the harm we're having on it, we're actually shifting that to, in the business of doing what we're doing, we're enhancing nature, we're enhancing the planet at the same time as enhancing our society. So doing it simultaneously. And it's exciting also to say that Sydney will be hosting the world's Nature Positive Summit in October 2024. So that is in partnership between the Australian government and the New South Wales government. So they're shaping that up right now. And there'll be global leaders attending that. It's a very significant moment. Biodiversity risk and climate reporting. So a lot of European businesses, it's just part of what they do to report on climate risk. And it makes sense because in business, you want to know what your risks are and be planning for them. And increasingly that climate risk reporting is required in Australia, but in Europe, it's actually being extended to biodiversity risk reporting, which will also come to Australia in time. So it's that acknowledgement that yes, climate can have an impact and biodiversity also has impact. And remembering that the two are interconnected, they don't stand alone, they impact and interact between the two of them. It can get into the situation where an Australian company may want to trade, do business with a European business. And that European business would increasingly look to us and say, well, where's your biodiversity or your climate reporting at? And if our businesses are saying, oh, we don't have that, then that may be a risk to that European country. So in terms of, the bigger picture, it is helpful for the biodiversity risk reporting to be something that business does here. And in Australia, we've got the State of Environment Reporting. So that the latest one, 2020, so completed every 5 years, and it gives you a little snapshot of the changes over time according to various indicators. So in this slide, I'm showing that it's not what I think that nature is in decline. It's this objective evidence that we know in an evidence sense that nature is in decline. You can also see in the Australian National Audit Office, the ANAO, so they do reviews of effectiveness of government and the implementation of acts. So they did a review in 2020 on the EPBC Act, and they found that the monitoring and reporting and evaluation, the Act just wasn't being enacted, properly, and that's a problem. We've got the announcement of the government around the Zero Extinctions Plan. So a 10-year plan to turn around this decline for 110 species in 20 places. So really ambitious, really positive, and just part of that bigger suite of commitments that we are going to need to be able to turn this around. So a lot of you will know the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. So it was enacted in '99 under the John Howard government. The Robert Hill was the Environment Minister at the time. And there were bits of legislation here and there, like the national parks, threatened species. And then there was we'd signed on to the Ramsar Agreement, the International Wetlands, but we hadn't really brought it into our country's national law. So the EPBC Act just went, okay, let's put it all under one umbrella. And that's how the law came to be. So, that's over 20 years ago. And a really positive moment, because it was a step forward in terms of really integrating it, bringing it together and raising the bar on what we had at the time. So the EPBC Act does a whole host of things, but certainly two of the big ones is that assessment of those projects. So, a proponent has something that they're going to propose in a community, and then it gets referred to the national government. So that's the environmental impact assessment process that many of you will know. And then there's also the process for conservation planning. So when we're looking to preserve the habitats of threatened species and ecological communities. And you will probably know that under the EPBC Act, there are 9 values that get protected. The national MNES, National Matters of National Environmental Significance, MNES. So there's the list there. So some of the sort of ones that stand out there are things like the threatened species and the ecological communities, those World Heritage Areas, and then those Ramsar sites as well. But, each of them are important. So you might have heard the word Samuel review. So it's required under the Act that every 10 years that the EPBC Act gets reviewed. So the second review was a Samuel review, and it found that the law is not fit for purpose. So there's lots of issues with it, and there was a whole host of recommendations which do form part of the many things that our PYL, Places You Love Alliance, has been asking when we've been going to government and shaping this process. So some of our asks is we need the clearer rules. That rule book needs to be clear. Anyone in this call who's dealt with the EPBC Act might have experienced that when you go through it and you're trying to see how it's going to be implemented at your local level, and you're thinking, well, what does this term mean? It's not adequately defined. There's a lot of these gaps that are in the current legislation. So it's about really getting rid of those gaps and having a really clear rule book for everybody. That's for community and business and government. Like, everyone knows very clearly how to move forward. And the EPA is about having, so we've got the Environment Department at the national level, and you've got your minister that sits above that. The EPA is an institution that sits to the side there, and it's independent. So it'll have a job to do, and the environmental impact assessment process will be its job. It doesn't have a minister above it guiding it or directing it. It is sitting over to the side here. So it has, in the structure of how it is set up, it is built to be able to make decisions based on the science and based on the Act. Whereas under the current system, you've got the ability for ministerial discretion to get in the way of a scientifically sound decision for species. So that's why the EPA is really significant. So we're wanting to see outcomes on the ground as well, not just keep us busy with the act. We need to see species starting to turn around in their well-being. And also ensuring that we maintain federal leadership rather than having states to do the job of looking at that national protection. It's actually having the federal government still have that oversight. And an example might be that they're able to see how all the different bits are fitting. There's, different states doing different things, but also certain systems are so large, like the Lake Eyre Basin, where it crosses over multiple jurisdictions. So a national level is able to have that better oversight. Now, funding, talking to a bunch WA Landcare groups, funding. We all know it's so important. And we know that the environment departments have gradually been underfunded over time. Well, we're needing an EPA, and the challenges are greater. So obviously funding is important. And part of the asks as well is, well, we need a system where the public trusts it, feels confident that a good decision is being made, where First Nation people's perspectives is meaningfully being embedded in that as well. Offsets are part of EPBC Act. So an example might be if a proposal is saying that they need to clear this land, and by running through the conditions of the offset is decided as a condition of approval, it's decided that that will be permitted to occur, but there should be an offset. Well, then we need to set it up so it's actually scientifically a sound process, because what has happened currently is that there has been an offset process that hasn't actually led to actual land or habitat that's actually protected or regenerated. It's been a theoretical that this will be offset, the development's gone ahead, but that area hasn't still come into fruition. And part of the reason why sometimes that might happen is that maybe that particular area, an offset can't be found. So it might have gone ahead and been approved with the idea of an offset, but the reality was an offset couldn't be found, because as your environment is so diminished, it gets harder to be able to offset, because what you've got left is almost, that's it. All of it is needing to be protected. There's nowhere else to go. So there's a lot of conditions around the offsets, and we're keeping a very close eye on that, believe me. Also just acknowledging that climate change is important. So climate change scenarios, considering them in looking at how the EPBC Act performs. Yeah. And they're having some great announcements. So yes, the Australian government has said that an EPA is part of the commitment. Also, the Environment Information Australia is a division within the department with the responsibility to better collate information. So we know that there's a lot of data and citizen science and all sorts of data sort of held, let's say species records, and they may not be in the one place. So when the federal government's making a decision on a development, they may not have all the information at hand. And sometimes community might dig it up and say, hang on, we've found a reputable, good scientific basis records here that should be part of the consideration. It often has been down to community running around finding those, and that's a failure of the legislation. Having those standards, the rule book, actually having them to be enforceable. So those standards are being developed and they will be enforceable. So we're looking at the nitty-gritty of that currently, making sure that there will be a recovery strategy for every threatened species that's been committed to. Few things, there's lots of things to still really be tweaking, but one of them is there is still this idea of ministerial call-in powers to the EPA, and that's a real concern. So we work really hard getting great EPA structure, get all these great rule book going, and then we've still got a ministerial call-in power. It could really undo all of that hard work. The full independence of EPA, the offsets, just really, we need to really be tightening up the conditions around those. The government has created 4 sessions of stakeholder engagement and I just spotted a spelling mistake. So sorry for those of you who are good at spotting those. We're up to round 3, which is next week, and then the 4th one sometime in March. So at each time there's been a little snapshot of some of the intention around drafting the Act, and our various PYL leaders and other stakeholders have had a little look at that. And it's a lock-in where they go into a room, they get to see it, but they don't get to take it away. And then session 2 is where they might have written up the Act, the bill that relates to session 1, and then they might have sort of released a few more of the suggestions of what would happen for other parts of the Act, and then we'd see the actual writing up of that in the next session. So they're just sort of doing it in this like step at a time way. So yeah, we're still very heavily engaged in that, the PYL leaders. Yeah, and there's a whole stack of stakeholders from all sectors that are part of those meetings.
We'll provide a snapshot of all of those organisations as well to everybody.
Yeah, can do that. And there will be a Senate inquiry at some stage towards the middle of the year, just because it is a big piece of legislation, and it, you know, it's of concern to so many people. So there will be probably an opportunity for that public consultation. So that's something that I'm sure you'd hear about. And then we'd be imagining that the reforms will be voted upon mid this year. So it was going to be through 2023, but the timelines have been extended. There is that Department Have Your Say function that is available now, and that's that link there. So that can also be shared in the follow-up email. So it's really important, some steps of things that you can do. It's really important that anyone who realises the importance of nature laws is getting out there and publicly having this be supported. Government really needs to know that they're backed in. They're backed in by a broad spectrum of people across lots of sectors to be able to have that courage to take on strong reforms that we do need to see those on-ground outcomes. So one way, there's many ways to do that. One is to be, you know, sharing the information, because not enough people realise some of what we've talked about today. A lot of people don't realise that. So they go, oh, law reform, you know, it just sounds really boring. But when you think about it in terms of its impact on your projects or just your life as a person in this country, it's something that is important. And if you've got grandkids or kids, you know, this is important to you. So, you know, really talking about it, sharing the content with your community, your neighbours, wherever, and meeting your federal parliamentarians. Do not underestimate it when they're hearing from, oh my gosh, I'm hearing from all over the country. People have been talking to us, they've been calling us. You know, there's so many ways to engage them. Meeting with them is really cool, and it's really easy because they want to hear from you. It's like a chat with your neighbour over the back fence. It's actually that easy. But you also, sometimes it's hard to line up a time with them. So even if you just speak to their staff, you call up their office, your federal parliamentarian, and say, talk to the person on the phone and just say, hey, you know, nature's really important to me. You know, and these nature laws are part of protecting that. Just that alone, it gets noted down and it gets shared.
As a side note to WA Landcare Network will be making good use of their parliamentary Friends of Landcare that we have here, and any WALN member should be well aware that they can contact their local member, and their local member is supposed to listen. That's why they've signed on to Parliamentary Friends of Landcare. So it's a very strong link to government, and we'll be utilising that a lot this year.
And one thing I say to people about that is just remember that there are paid lobbyists who go to Canberra or even live in Canberra permanently who represent business interests and so on. So when you, as a person, either as a citizen or as someone part of a group, what you are doing is you are representing the issues that you and your sector hold dearly. And that gives them a temperature read of their community. And if they don't hear from you, then they think, oh, well, our electorate is all about these priorities. But you talking to them helps them to even that out and actually have a more realistic view of the values of their community. They really need that to be able to do their job.
Tarquin, I'll just jump in. There's just a question in the chat that I think is important. Christine from Urban Bushland Council just asking, what difference do you think these laws will make to the local laws in each state? Do federal laws have precedence?
Yeah, so I mean, look, it's hard to know because in the long run, if the ambition of this legislation is what we need it to be, over time, it's actually, as you have jurisdictions review their laws, it will shift them and have them be more ambitious. And as we see things change and nature decline and the public become more sensitive to environmental decline, there's a bigger appetite to implement laws that are going to actually help our communities, the well-being of our communities and our nature. So in that way, there's this sort of impact that it does have. It's not a noticeable one over a year or two. It happens over time. It's a shift in your culture. But it impacts, particularly in development scenarios. So if you've got a proponent wanting to do something in your patch, and it's going to have this major impact on some threatened species or communities. If you've heard of, in Queensland, we've got the Toondah Harbour development, which is a massive development that's going to actually reclaim sea, and it's going to swallow up part of this international wetland, the Moreton Bay Ramsar wetland. Now, that's an example where the law has been inadequate so far, and that impacts what happens on your shores, on the ground, on the land that's around you. So yes, it does have an impact for sure, and it over time would have a trickle on to those state and local, but that's bigger timelines.
Annabelle's just asking too that, and that this was my impression, that federal environment laws override state and territory laws. That's right,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. And so the way it works currently is what probably would happen is a proponent goes, oh, I want to build some apartment blocks here. And they'll probably tend to go to their state government, and then the state government will go, hang on, I think this is probably from our search, from our system, it looks like it's going to trigger some national values. You're going to have to go to the feds. And that would be the step. And that's where the current process is. You sort of look at that first, and if you get approval, doesn't mean your project's going ahead. It means you're now going to state and then needing to manage whatever those state laws and local laws are that you need to comply with. So, and that's where that national oversight occurs there. But one of the failings there too is that it has been reasonably on this voluntary capacity. So I guess a lot of projects that probably should have been referred to the federal government haven't been, and it would be really hard to know the numbers on those. So the exciting thing too, in terms of the other steps you can take, is we actually do have a landholder open letter. So this is one where landholders, farmers, people who are working the land who value looking after biodiversity on their properties and recognise that good, strong laws is the backbone they need to support the bigger system around their properties. They can put their name to show that public support for nature laws, and they can do it via the open letter. So it's really exciting. I'm so happy. I've been working on that in the last couple of months. And there's also a business open letter. So there might be businesses you have in mind who might be interested to sign as well. So that would be an open letter shared on a website with those logos and property names, and people who've signed on to that would be shared there. And the other thing is, if your group does media, well, number one, if your group doesn't do media, I think you probably have stories to share with your regional media, positive things, whether great news projects that you do, or going to media to highlight local issues. And if you are doing that, keep in mind that you might want to put a sentence or two to nature laws. You know, how does this value or issue that you're dealing with relate to stronger nature laws? I'd encourage you to do that, because that really helps to show politicians, we're getting this from all levels. We also have the Places You Love Alliance also have a video that you can share, and a few other bits and pieces that you can easily get access to and share in your groups. And it's adaptable to suit your local, your context. So it's not like Queensland looking advertising for, WA supporters. And we have various resources which we'll share in the follow-up email, which includes the Nature Laws report card. That's the little one here on the left, which is just a nice overview of all the different bits and pieces of the asks that we've got around the nature laws. And that calling all nature lovers, that's the video, the PYL video that you could share if you chose to. So yeah, we've got various resources, and I'll share as many of those, as well as this presentation. If you wanted to take this presentation and share it with your community, it's been designed. You can see why it's text heavy. It's been designed that it's easy for you to go, Tarquin told me this, and now you can deliver it, because it's about spreading the word. And that is the presentation.
Thank you, Tarquin. That was awesome. Very informative there. I'm going to throw it out to the floor and see if anyone's got any questions. I'm sure there are some questions. Keep in mind, I'm seeing a lot of kind of legal type questions coming through for Tarquin. That's not her background. So if she can't answer it, I'll endeavour to answer it for you and get someone else to answer it for you. But Kelly's just written here, can you please explain why the referral of some developments to the federal assessment process is voluntary and why some don't get referred?
It isn't intended to be voluntary. Yeah, it's not intended to be voluntary. I think you could just say it's an example of one of the failings of the legislation. It's exactly why at local levels people have been going, why is this not being referred? And another community in another part of the country, why is this not being referred? And being really highly frustrated. So it's an example of the failings. And I can't tell you more beyond that in terms of if there are penalties or what's the nitty-gritty. But what I do know is that another failing has been the underfunding, which has then really undermined the capacity to monitor what's going on and to also hold people to account. So if you were given an approval with conditions to your development, well, who's going around and checking those conditions are actually being met by a proponent? So it's just an example of that failure. And the people who are part of the design, discussions to design it, they probably would have a quite specific answer to you about what they're proposing. There is regional mapping is proposed as part of the nature laws, the reforms. It's not looking to be an overly promising process for us at the moment. I guess it was promising to create a bit of a traffic light system. I guess initially we might have thought across the whole country, with the idea that if you saw a green area, that might be like impacted areas where it's green for development. It's to say that if your development is within this area, there's probably not a lot of NES that matters to protect within that. So it's kind of this, it's not quite a green light, but it's in the direction of it being going to be a quicker, process. Whereas the red areas were the areas where you go, hang on, there's definitely going to be some critical values here that need to be looked at before we move forward. The idea was to make it a bit more easier for development, easier for proponents, so they've got a clearer picture as well. But it was also to try to bring in those cumulative impacts, so that you could look at it in a national landscape scale. The reality is that as you can imagine with mapping, you've got a lot of 100 questions like, well, things change over time. How are you going to account for those changes? And how do you not lock in poor information that we had back then? And how do you not have that map then become something that just facilitates really unsustainable decisions? So it's pretty tricky.
Yeah, because that cumulative impact, I mean, we had the strategic assessment of Perth and Peel a few years ago, which was all about looking at that cumulative impact and the strategic plans that were written up, the sub-regional plans. And then I sort of stepped out of, you know, that whole space, the landcare space, for a little bit. But my understanding was then the state government just went, no, we're not doing that. You know, so all this work had been done by the feds with the strategic assessment of Perth and Peel through the EPBC Act, but then the state government just went, well, we're not doing it. So it just all went by the wayside. Is that accurate? Is that, and I imagine it's both state and government who would be referring to the feds for these developments as well.
Yeah, I don't have enough knowledge about those strategic assessments and how that works, and then how that interacts with state in that sense, in that example. It's something, I guess, I can find an answer for you if you like, because you said Peel, there's a Peel area.
Yeah, the strategic assessment.
I've heard it referred to before, yes.
Yeah, it was 20, I can't even think when it was now, 2013? 20, yeah. If anyone else knows on the call, that'd be great. Because I kind of went, and then I sort of came back and went, what happened? Where did that go? Because it was, you know, as the way forward. So,
Yeah.
We'll definitely look into that for you, Kelly, and see if we can get an answer for you there. Annabelle has just dropped in a question. Are key threatening processes included in the new nature laws? And do they now include loss of habitat as a key threatening process?
So some of the terminology has changed. I don't know if key threatening processes has changed. So there are people who are doing the nitty-gritty negotiations in all of this. I'm not one of those. I think that's probably a good thing, because it is a full-time job just understanding all those nitty-gritty. Certainly one of the points that our PYL, Places You Love Alliance leaders, are pressing the government on is for a better way for these reforms to actually be engaging in those key threatening processes, particularly, I mean, one of the major causes that key drivers of species loss is habitat destruction. So really pressing these reforms to go a bit harder in that space, which is also a failing of the current laws. So that's something that is happening now, that, you know, those leaders are pressing on those now, and those details are yet to be made clear. It comes back to, I'll just say quickly, it comes back to, oh, sorry.
No, you're okay, you go.
I was just saying, it comes back to that need for that cross-sector support, because sectors of business will try to push hard against that, yet other parts of business and other sectors are in principle quite supportive of this. But if they're not expressing that, then the ability for us to negotiate these stronger asks of the reforms is tricky. Like, we're doing it from this side, but if we need to build that political ambition that then the decision makers are willing, because they can see that broad support, they're willing to take this on in a more wholesome way. Yeah, in a way that we all know that we need.
Will the PYL Alliance be talking at the Nature Positive Summit? Have they been invited? Because from my understanding, it's invite only.
It's invite only. It's something we're keeping an eye on. It really comes down to who they're inviting, what their process is. And it's quite it's a really small number of people, and they've already, you know, global leaders will be attending. But so it's watch this space, basically. Yeah.
Anyone else have any other questions? No more questions?
Hey.
Oh, Linda.
Sorry, hi Linda.
Hi. Do you know if there's actually going to be stronger, with these new laws coming through, whether there's going to be stronger punishments for people that do wrong? You know, there's obviously some people with limited grasp of ethics, and while there is some kind of financial incentive for them, well, there's going to be a greater financial incentive to do wrong compared with the punishment afterwards, then they're going to keep doing wrong. So is there going to be some strengthening of these laws?
Yeah, so part of that is I think there are some changes in how it's referred, the requirements around referrals, so that's important. Those details I can find out for you what we know, but a lot of this is still being worked out. In terms of the punishments or the consequences, I can get an answer for you on that, in that I know that the capacity to follow that up has been one of the biggest problems. It's the capacity for the departments to actually follow that up. So then it's been a weak implementation of it. So that's another problem. Then the next question would be, well, were the penalties adequate? And like, are we looking to see, or like with the reforms, is it looking as though they're going to be the same penalties or expanded? I can get an answer for you. It's an interesting one. I'm not aware. I haven't sort of heard anything along those lines, but I think it's a really good question.
No, that would be really good. I'm not looking for draconian laws of sort of capital punishment, but at the moment, it just seems to be that they're barely even getting a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, so it's part of that idea that I mean, good legislation is where you're wanting behaviour change and it helps you implement that. And the penalties are there to make people go, oops, if that's going to happen, we better not do that.
Yes.
And if the penalties are so poor that people think, oh, look, it'll be a slap on the wrist, who cares? So no, it's absolutely a very good question, and I can find the answer for you.
Thank you.
Great questions, everyone. I think WA's got a lot of fights on their hands this year, and I think it's really important that we stay connected and we stay as a collective voice, and I hope that these monthly check-ins can help with that process, and we'll certainly be working hand in hand with lots of member groups this year on a lot of different fronts. If anyone doesn't have any more questions, I might let Tarquin go. It's a little bit later in the afternoon for her and she's got a little one to care for. So I just wanted to say thank you, Tarquin, so much for joining us today and offering us that insight. Really appreciate it. Any links, anything that's come up? Thanks, Kelly. Anything that's come up in the conversation today that requires a little bit of further research, Tarquin and I will work together to make sure that we get your questions answered there. Next Landcare Checks In is on Tuesday, March 12th, and we'll be chatting to the inspiring Sam Marwood from Odonata Foundation, who's going to be chatting to us about eDNA and its incredible applications in the Landcare space. Sam was at our annual gathering. Some of you may have been there to listen to him talk. He's really amazing. So I'm really excited to see where those conversations might lead for our community. And on Tuesday, the 27th of Feb, we've got our first Landcare Build Skills, which I feel it's a strategic Landcare Build Skills around writing compelling environmental submissions, because I feel like that's something that we're all going to have to get a handle on this year. So I can send through the registration links to that. I'm sorry about my voice today. I'm a little bit unwell. I hope that hasn't been too jarring on anybody. I've really liked seeing everyone's faces. I missed having communication with the community over that quiet period, and definitely hit the ground running now and looking forward to a busy year with WOAN supporting you guys on the ground as well. So thanks for your time today, and I'll send out the recording and a few other bits and pieces in the next few days. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.